Okay, let's get going. Today it's going to be a bit of a shorter session. If you were a part of the last webinar that we did, that was about a 45-minute talk, and we went through a lot of complex concepts and kind of stacked them on top of each other. What we'd like to start doing is have shorter sessions, maybe 20 to 30 minutes in length, and spend more time in Q&A. Last time we only had about 5 to 10 minutes left over at the end of it all. And that gives us an opportunity to answer specific questions that you may have for your organization. And then at the same time, we can go through these shorter sessions and put out more webinars instead of having them spaced at maybe a month apart. Maybe they can be more frequent than that. So again, today, this is a topic that a lot of our clients talk to us about. We've seen it as a question generally in the marketplace in terms of what does your marketing team need to look like for you to maximize the value that you're capturing from the marketing side of the business. And so we wanted to spend some time on that. And depending on wherever you are as a business, the answer for you is going to look different. So we've done our best to walk you through the framework or a way of thinking about that for your business so that you can get to the right answer for your particular situation. In terms of your realities and what we've seen as the most common, something that we hear all the time is and see all the time is that marketing teams are usually small and mighty, and they're usually in charge of a lot of items, projects, tasks, initiatives, and large revenue targets. But yet the team is quite small and often a few people. There are aggressive growth targets that are being set by the board or by the executive team. There isn't nearly enough bandwidth to execute on what's needed to hit those targets or do all the activities that we need to do to be able to take the company to where it needs to get to. And at the same time, there's an inability to get approval for additional budget for additional headcount that's required to be able to do the things that we'd like to do. And so what we'd like to do is provide you with a framework to be able to get a yes to expanding your marketing team, regardless of the situation that you're in, and give you a framework to think about that. Before we can do that, it's important to understand what are the critical inputs to figuring out the right org structure. And what I've seen inside most businesses is there's almost like a wish list of roles that we need, and we just go with whatever budget has been approved for, and we pick out the 1 or 2 roles that we require most, and that's the one that we end up funding. Instead, what I think a much better way to get to that structure is to figure out a scientific way to getting to an answer of what is the right org structure for marketing look like for this business, and what does the hiring roadmap look like as we're trying to build the right organization for the company. And so in thinking about that, I would say there's 4 critical factors to consider and use as inputs into that ultimate decision of org structure. The first is, what stage of maturity is the business at? And depending on where you are, whether you're a startup, you're in Series A, you're owned by private equity, and you have multiple products, depending on that, the answer here is going to look a lot different. Number 2 is your business model. Are you selling a low-priced ACV type of product to a large market, or are you an enterprise B2B company with very limited targets that you're kind of going after? And so that'll inform who you need to execute on your marketing strategy. Third is, what are the growth opportunities available to your organization that you need to prioritize? For example, is cross-sell, upsell a really big initiative inside your business? Then your team will look different than if net new or inbound marketing is the focus. So we want to factor those in. And then the last piece is, what are our revenue targets and budgeting plans that have been made available to us that we can use as information to inform this org structure and perhaps even plug into this budgeting cycle to make the right business cases. This is a framework that I've shared in the past. And so I think it's critical to understand what is the starting point of the business. So are you in an organization where it's more of a new go-to-market, and that could be either a startup or a new product that's being launched? And in those cases, the marketing team for that new product or startup is quite limited. Sometimes it's founder-led, sometimes it's 1 or 2 people. Number 2 is it's sales-led, where sales is the primary revenue driver, marketing is a support function, and less than 10% of marketing-generated pipeline, less than 10% of pipeline is being generated by marketing efforts. Third is nascent marketing. Marketing investment is still quite limited, less than $300,000 in most cases. Marketing team is less than 3 people, and pipeline generated is still roughly around 10% or less. Then there's some marketing impact where you have 4 to 7 people, and pipeline being contributed is 10 to 20%. And then you have sophisticated marketing organizations that are 25 to 50% plus. In some cases, we've even seen 70 to 80%, and the marketing team is larger than 10 people. And the way to think about this is as you're kind of going through the different stages here, the size of marketing teams scales exponentially. We have one client as an example that has over 100 marketers on their team, but they have 20 product lines, plus they are doing 800 million in revenue across different geographies and markets and verticals and product lines and segments. And so for them, having 100 plus marketers makes a ton of sense. And then we've seen clients that have 5 million in revenue and they're closer, to the sales-led model, and they have 3 marketers on their team. And so really understanding where you are as a business is the starting point. Because if you're in a sales-led organization, trying to pull together an org chart that says we need 20 people or 15 people to make marketing actually successful in this organization is very unlikely to get funded. Conversely, if you are in a sales-led model, you may start with 2 or 3 critical roles, prove out what's working and what's not working, and then use business cases to draft the right funding for additional initiatives. And that's how you get additional headcount. Similarly, you want to look at your go-to-market model against your cost of acquisition. And so inside businesses that are self-serve, if I think about a company like Calendly, having an enterprise sales team is usually not applicable to most customers. They may have an enterprise plan for which they have some sales reps, but in general, Calendly is using a no-touch approach, and their cost of acquisition is very low, and so is their price point as a result. And so their marketing model will look quite different than a company that's selling enterprise products. Like I think about Salesforce or HubSpot or Microsoft Dynamics, they're going to have large sales teams with a large price point for their offering, and they can spend a lot more on their CAC as well. And so understanding that is critical, and that connects to who you're actually going after. So this is a model that look at your ideal customers and your target market with a filter of size of deal and how many people are actually out there. So let's say you were targeting the 500 biggest consumer packaged goods companies in the world. Well, you're likely going after whales, and your average deal sizes are north of 300,000 and potentially even north of $1 million. And that's your entire account list. Conversely, if you look on the other end, a company like Calendly may have a lot of customers on their free plan, and then some customers paying $10 a month, where their average deal size is closer to $100 a year or $200 a year. And you have a bunch of other variations in between, where there's deal sizes of 1 to 5,000, 5 to 50, and 50 to 300,000. And depending on where your business is trying to find customers, your marketing org structure will need to look quite different. So if we are targeting the 500 largest CPG companies in the world, we're going to have a very heavy sales team, because we know we can spend up to $1 million to acquire that customer and still break even in the first year. And then the marketing efforts, as a result, will be focused on enabling the sales team. So sales enablement becomes a focus, product marketing becomes a focus, account-based marketing becomes a focus. Conversely, if we're hunting rabbits or deers or mice, we may be going after the approach of inbound and self-serve and more digital channels, and keeping our CAC in check without expending too much dollars on acquiring customers, where our payback period is north of 2 years. And our total addressable market follows that as a result. So if there are only 500 CPG companies out there, well, we likely are going to need to do one-to-one communication for those accounts. Whereas if anybody with Google Calendar can be a customer of ours, then we have to take a one-to-many approach, right? So depending on who you're going after, you need to have some sort of a total addressable or market analysis or segmentation analysis done to say, our market size is worth $5 billion and it's made up of 5,000 accounts or 500 accounts or 5 million accounts or potential customers. And depending on that, that'll inform what type of marketing team we need, because we need to work on different activities. And so then the question becomes, what do those activities look like? And we like to bucket marketing really into about 7 to 8 key sub-functions. So you have demand generation, and a bunch of things can't fit into demand gen. But primarily we're defining it as programs and campaigns that are focused on driving pipeline. And then you have content marketing, which is about making sure we have assets for every stage of the buyer journey so that the buyer can educate themselves, or we can use content to get them to the next stage in their journey until they're eventually ready to purchase or stay with us as a customer. Third is customer marketing. This is where we are marketing to our existing base and driving either upsells or cross sells to get them to increase their average deal size, or how much revenue we're generating per account from each of those customers. Fourth is product marketing. This is where we're educating customers on the product, new functionality, features. We want to improve retention. We want to improve usage, and product marketing plays a key role in getting us to that point. Then we have corporate marketing. This is more of the traditional marketing, which is brand comms, events, PR activities. And this is essential as you continue to grow as a company. So depending on the market that you're in, for example, if you are targeting CPG companies, you may need to go to all the big CPG events that are out there as a form of being present in that marketplace to catch all the right accounts into your funnel. You have marketing ops, which is about building the data infrastructure and the reporting on all these different activities so that we have an idea of what's working, what's not working, what's the ROI on certain marketing activities, which channels are performing better than others so that we can reallocate budget. And then the last is sales enablement, where we're supporting the sales team with the right collateral so that they can be more successful and close more deals. And so as we look at all the items that we covered, when we get to this stage, the mix of activities for each business across these different sub-functions looks quite different. So as an example, if we were to look on the left side, this might be what Calendly actually has to do, where their focus might be on paid search, paid social, and SEO as their primary drivers for getting users into the funnel from a marketing standpoint. They're also obviously focused on product-led growth as their core driver, but from a marketing activity standpoint, they're looking likely at these three. Conversely, if we're talking about that enterprise B2B company that's targeting CPG top 500 accounts out there, their mix might look like account-based marketing, sales enablement, and customer marketing to their existing accounts so that they can grow the average deal sizes that those customers are spending with the core business. And so depending on the business model, again, you have to keep coming back to this because this is the starting point for defining the right org structure for your company. And then an easy or a way to filter this, or a framework that you can use to think about this is if we look at ACV down this first column here and we map it against all of those functions that we just discussed, anything in green is something that is essential for a company or product line within that ACV. Yellow is, a lukewarm area where you would have some investment, but maybe not all the way. And pink is something that you just would not do in that business. So for example, for Calendly to do ABM, quite unlikely unless they're going after like the 1,000+ employee companies that need some sort of calendar management software. Conversely, for a B2B enterprise company, it makes total sense, right? Similarly, when you think about corporate marketing or sales enablement as a core revenue driver, probably not as valuable for companies that have deal sizes under 5,000, but quite valuable on the sales enablement side when you have large deal sizes with long sales cycles and the sales team needs as much collateral as possible. And so you can kind of filter all of these activities and start to think about what does that mix look like, and how would you want to weight the limited marketing budget that you have accessible to you, and how would you weight the headcount that's available to you so that you can prioritize the right roles that need to be hired. As you identify the right sub functions that require focus and where you want to put weight, that's when you want to start looking at the opportunities where you'd like to be able to scale. So if you are, for example, looking at paid search or paid advertising as a core driver for the business, you want to take a look at how much room is there to scale spend in a particular business. So for this business here, they spent about $24,000 in paid media. They generated about $38,000 in close won dollars, and their ROI was 1.59. And so they can easily take that $23,000 in monthly spend and they could scale it to $50,000 potentially on a monthly basis, which leads to a $600,000 annual spend. Similarly, you could look at content and map out which items do we actually have from a sales enablement perspective, or from a nurturing perspective or sales enablement perspective, and what do we need to build out as a priority, and what do we push to later. So for example, if you need sales enablement assets in the form of case studies and you don't have that might be higher on your priority list as a way to figure out which headcount you need to support your growth plans. And you may not, for example, prioritize product intro videos because that's less of a need based on the type of business model that you're in. And the last thing you want to look at as you kind of go through this type of work where you're trying to forecast the ROI from the opportunities that are available to you and the investment required, is to actually look at overall budget needed, where when you look at MQLs required, when you look at your conversion rates through the funnel, how many percentage of MQLs get to SQL, what percentage of those get to close one status, and what's the dollar value of each of those deals? Well, you want to look at, on an MQL basis, are you on track? Are you behind? And how much budget do you need if you need to hit some sort of a threshold? So in this company's case, their threshold is at $150 an MQL. So their marketing budget for 2022 would need to be $2.59 million. And so are they underfunded against that, or do they not have enough marketing budget attached where they actually need to input more budget to actually hit those targets? And then the next question becomes, well, if we are going to give them more budget, well, how would we deploy that budget? And so some of the work that we just walked through, and this is oversimplified, I've tried to give you guys a high level view, but you would want to do this work for every single channel and come back to these budgeting metrics to say, here's how we would increase our budget. Let's say the budget used to be 2.29 to 2.59. That's about a $300,000 increase. That difference, this is how we would deploy it in terms of programs across different channels, or potentially even headcount. And if you think about it as a process, the way to build business cases is you want to look at your available growth opportunities. You bring that and map it against your revenue targets. You add in a layer of how long will it take us to generate an ROI on our investment, and what is the time horizon for that. You eventually take that to an investment committee where you get approval for additional budget, whether it's headcount or programs, and then you bring that budget to fuel the next steps in your marketing org structure. And what ends up happening in a lot of businesses, or in terms of just planning for headcount in general, is marketers often skip to this step or do these last two things. But because these first three steps have not been completed, it's very unlikely to get the budget that we want. So when we're going for a headcount ask, we want to say, hey, this is kind of where we are as a business. Here's our right strategy. Here's the opportunity available to us, and we're not capturing most of it. And in order to capture it, here are the people we need, and here's what they're going to be working on, and here's the ROI they're going to generate. And so now we need this headcount to be able to fund us to the next level. And in those cases, you're far more likely to get your budgeting asks, and also your asks for headcount are likely to be far more reasonable. And the more reasonable it is and aligned with what the board is planning anyways for the business, the more likely you are to get budget for whatever it is that you want to do. And so I'd say that's roughly the framework. And what I've done from here is really talk about the different phases of marketing organizations. And I've taken you through 5 here, so I'll show you that. And there can be many more variations, but the point here is to say, understanding where you are as a starting point, and then following the steps that we just kind of went through to be able to say, we're starting with 2 or 3 people. How do we get from 2 to 3 to 5 to 7 to 11 to potentially 20 people on the marketing team? There is a process in understanding where we are as a business and which phase we're in. So phase 1 is usually where a lot of startups or founder-led businesses find themselves, where there's some sort of a marketing leader, there's a content marketer on staff, or a demand gen specialist, and these people are quite junior, and everything else is usually outsourced to freelancers, for example, for design or development. Maybe there's even an SEO specialist or an agency that we've hired, but the marketing team is quite limited. This is more than enough to get marketing programs off the ground and get proof points in the form of data that we can take back to the CEO or to the board. And it really relies on this person being more of a full stack marketer. And so that has to be the key hire, somebody that can write, somebody that can run campaigns, somebody that can build ad creative or write ad copy, and be able to do some reporting that we can take back and ask for additional budget. As companies grow past that stage, you kind of have a third tier created where you now maybe have a VP of marketing, you have directors for each layer or each functional, sub-functional area of the business, and then you have specialists underneath those people. So under the demand gen person, there might be one paid media specialist and a paid media agency. Under director of content, you might have a content specialist and a product marketing person. You might have SEO split out, especially if you are more of an inbound driven business, and an SEO specialist underneath them, maybe even an agency here. And then you have a marketing ops manager, and these 4 people are the people that are reporting to the VP of marketing. I would say the companies that have this type of an org structure are roughly at that 7 to 10 or 5 to 10 million dollar mark, and their marketing team is somewhere in that range, where they have they are making an impact and they have or directors under the marketing leader, but they're not a fully fleshed out marketing team yet, and there's a lot more growth left to capture. Phase 3 is when there's a lot more roles that can be added underneath the functions that we just listed. So you may have, for example, a corporate marketing team emerge where you have an events manager or PR or comms leader. Under that person, you might have additional roles under each of these people as well. And the revenue targets are likely ramping up for the VP of marketing as well. So your number of MQLs or pipeline that you need to drive for marketing within this organization might be 2x or 3x what it was for an organization that looks like this. And likely, I think I may have even been a little light on the roles. There might be 1 or 2 or 3 additional people inside an organization like this. Phase 4, and this is where I have drawn a distinction between what a VP of marketing does and what a CMO would do, is there's a lot more purview that the CMO has and a lot more budget that person has access to. You can see there's a dedicated product marketing team, dedicated corporate marketing team. Inbound and outbound demand gen have been split up. Maybe SDRs or BDRs are reporting into the outbound demand gen function. Maybe they're in sales, but oftentimes we see this model as well. And there are multiple agencies involved, somebody that's helping with paid media, somebody that's helping us write content, somebody that's helping us implement or is a Salesforce partner on the marketing ops side, and just simply a lot more people under the leadership of this person. I would say organizations that are at this stage usually are north of 20 to 25 million in revenue. And they're experiencing significant growth. And so there's a need for enough people to be supporting all the different marketing activities that the business needs to work on. And oftentimes these types of companies also have more than one product line. But this approach, the way you've seen, is totally functionalized. It's not split out by product line. And that's because these companies have not reached a level of scale where needing to separate out by product line may not make total sense at this point yet. And so that brings me to phase 5. And this is where, this is a simplified org chart just to give an idea. Is there would be maybe 2x the number of people that you see in phase 4 under phase 5. But what you would see is you have regionalized or product line focused teams. So product line 1, product line 2, product line 3, or different geographies like EMEA, APAC, North America, as an example. And there are different sub-functions under there. So in terms of content, product marketing, customer marketing, and sales enablement, that's regionalized or product line focused. And then you have centers of expertise in marketing ops, corporate marketing, and demand gen that help all of those product lines across the board. And we usually see this in businesses that have 5 to 10 plus product lines, where M&A is a key part of the growth strategy. And so there are companies being bought every quarter. There's a ton of complexity. And so you need some sort of a core parent company level marketing team that's handling some of these core functions. But at a product line level, the content looks different for each product line. Maybe language is different. Maybe there's legal distinctions in each of the product lines that require some level of subject matter expertise. And so having this type of a separation is critical there. And here you can see that because there's so much more complexity to manage, the CMO here has to be far more talented than the VP of marketing at this phase 3, or even at the phase 4, because this person is usually managing fewer product lines. And so what I'd say is, depending on where your company is, you're trying to navigate your company through these phases as you grow. And so if you're at phase 2, you're likely have items on your roadmap that get you to phase 3. If you're at phase 3, you likely have items on your hiring roadmap that get you to phase 4, and so on. And so it's important to identify where are you on that journey, and then prioritize roles accordingly, and have the right business cases to be able to prioritize the right roles. The main takeaways, and I can see we're coming up on 25 minutes here, so I'd like to jump to some questions, is building the team for your right context, and that includes looking at the stage of maturity, your business model and strategy, the growth opportunities that are available, and your overall financial targets and the budgeting that's available is the key. And then the additional factors that get brought in is the number of product lines, your geographical expansion plans, and potentially the M&A activity that's involved in your context that can change some of the dynamics. So an example of a role that's not listed in this would be an integration manager, especially as more product lines are acquired. You probably need somebody who's in charge of bringing in a new business line into the structure to make sure nothing skips a beat as you're integrating the companies together. So factoring all that in, but at the same time, you're kind of still working through the core functions that are needed for each of the different product lines. So I will stop there, and let's see if we can get to some questions and go from there. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we can go from there. Okay, so Roberta's asking, how do you accommodate for brand versus demand strategies mix, heavier on one or the other, or even mix when it comes to team makeup? That's a great question, Roberta. So that really depends on the level of maturity of an organization. One of the things that I didn't cover in going through these phases is I just talked about how the team evolves, but the stages of maturity that we talked about up here are actually independent of those stages, right? So you could, for example, have a company that is very sophisticated in its marketing efforts and look more like this, right? And so we want to be able to figure out in a particular business, have we captured as much demand as possible that is available for us on the marketing side? So let's say we are more of like a mid-tier ACV type of business where we're hunting customers that are between 5 and 50,000. So our mix of marketing tactics would look like a combination of inbound. There would be some ABM, paid search, paid social, some product marketing, and sales enablement, right? So we kind of have everything kind of being run across the board here. And so the first question would be, are we capturing enough value from all these existing avenues and sub-functions for the business? Until we've maxed these activities out, going down the route of brand building can be risky, but at the same time, it can help us fuel how much pipeline is coming from paid media, as an example. And so I think earlier on, if you're in the zone and let's say you're at about 5 to 10 million in revenue, the focus should be more on maximizing these channels. But as you start to find scale, you see year-over-year growth, your number of MQLs or pipeline per month is increasing, and there's a core set of activities that you know drives value for the business. At some point, you would shift from being more focused on capturing the demand to focus on actually creating demand. And that's where you would focus on thought leadership activities and becoming more of a leader in the marketplace for that particular industry. And that would inevitably have an impact across the board here. One of the mistakes that we've seen is companies will, until they have actually worked through this, before they figure this part out, they may launch a podcast or a video series, which is good and will pay some sort of dividend. But because some of these fundamental pieces are not in place, your conversion rates through the funnel won't be good. Maybe people come to the site and they bounce right off because your website is not structured the right way. And so you want to make sure a lot of those core pillar pieces are in place before, especially when you have a limited team. If your marketing team is 3 to 5 people and half of them are working on only thought leadership pieces, that can create a problem when it comes time to actually hitting those targets. I'm scrolling up here. How do you hire and engage a CMO for their abilities? This is where understanding what stage you're in is critical. For example, imagine you found a top flight CMO and paid them top dollar to be a part of an organization that's at this stage. Inevitably, you would end up parting ways with that person, even though they're super talented, because you're likely paying them way too much to fill this role when somebody more junior can do this job. And so you want to be careful not to overhire for this phase that you're in. And at the same time, you don't want to underhire. If this is your actual need and you end up hiring a VP of marketing, we find ourselves inside of a lot of businesses that have really great VPs of marketing, but they're in the wrong seat and a different CMO actually needs to be there. So understanding and having a self-awareness is in terms of where you are as an organization and the pedigree of CMO or marketing leader you need, and then doing a search according to that. So for an organization like this, you have to find someone that has either experience leading a multinational, multi-product line organization, or has the capacity to do that as the next step in their career, and not a VP of marketing that, let's say, leans heavily on the demand gen side, because more likely than not, then they're going to lean heavily here and some of these other areas are going to be ignored. So it starts with understanding where you are as a business. Okay, on James asks, is it better to hire from down up or up down? Great question. So if we're looking at a org structure like this, I guess the question is, do we staff up for these 4 roles first, or do we hire the paid media specialist before we hire the director of demand gen, or the content specialist before the director of content? That is a really, really great question. I think the answer depends on the org that you are in and the VP of marketing that you have. I think no matter what, this is the role to hire for first, and likely someone that leans towards demand gen and content, because that's what's going to move the pipeline the most. And then if you have the right person in the seat, then you could skip these 2 roles and have people being staffed up under them. But then because they are leaning more here, you would likely need to hire director level people, at least on the ops side. Corporate marketing is something that you could get away with a specialist on in the short term. And so I would say it depends, but you can skip. At some point though, if there are aggressive targets, you don't want this person that's the VP of marketing to be playing the role of director of demand gen, because then they can't support some of these other functions. And so there has to be not that much time between when a junior person is hired to where this director level person is hired as well. I see Abhay asks, how important is it for marketing to be reporting to the CRO instead of being a separate function, especially in multiple founder companies? I would say in most cases, marketing reporting to the CRO is probably not a great decision, especially when marketing is in charge of generating pipeline. If you are a sales-led organization, odds are marketing does report to the CRO, and that comes with its own set of challenges because the CRO is not as plugged into demand gen activities. Usually there are talented CROs out there. So, but in general, I'd say CROs are more sales leaning. They don't look at marketing as a pipeline source. They look at it more as a sales enablement function. And then marketing ends up being more traditional. It does events, PR, comms, and sales enablement when it should be doing revenue generating activities, which is demand gen, content, and activities like that. And so we want to have the right structure, and depending on the phase that you're in, right? So if you are in phase 1 and you have 2 or 3 marketers, it really doesn't matter where they report up to. But as you start growing through these stages of maturity, for people like this VP of marketing or this CMO to not have a seat at the table with the CEO is kind of ridiculous, especially when brand is run through this person, and the CEO should be directly connected to the brand. And so I would say ideally not reporting to the CRO. What are your thoughts about accommodating a chief growth officer versus a CMO? That's a question from Priya. That's a great question as well. And I would say a chief growth officer becomes more relevant in phase 4 and phase 5, especially as you have multiple product lines and other growth levers that can be pulled. For example, if you have payment processing running through your business, and payments revenue is a critical lever for you, a chief growth officer can bring together different product lines, leaders from product and sales and marketing together to focus on that. But again, it depends on the organization's culture and structure, where if there is a CRO in place and it's more of a sales-led organization, a chief growth officer probably wouldn't be a good fit. But if a company has shifted to being more marketing-led and has a sophisticated marketing engine, then a CMO could eventually graduate to a chief growth officer type of role and bring those functions together. And the marketing leaders then just focused on pipeline generation. I see Sudhi is asking, what is a CMO paid for a small to mid-sized business, not a fast growth venture or PE funded? It really varies. The variables, I'd say there's 3 or 4 of them. One is size of company. 2 is stage of company in terms of marketing organization. Like regardless of your size, if you're a $5 million company, but you're marketing led and your org looks like this, you need a far more talented CMO than, let's say, if you have an org that looks like this. Third would be looking at the complexity of the marketing problem at hand. And even if it's not a fast growing venture, the more complex it is, the more unique the individual that you're looking for. And then there's additional factors in terms of the cities that your business is actually running in. Are you a remote team, or are you operating out of San Francisco, or are you in Norfolk, Virginia, or something like that? And so depending on where you are, there's a ton of ranges that it can go from. But for a VP of marketing, you could start at 150 on the low side and go significantly higher to that. And a CMO for a large business at phase 5 could be making 300K plus easily. So yeah. Just going through these questions. Have you noticed any patterns to how sales grows / adjusts alongside a growing marketing team? Great question. So we've noticed that a lot of sales orgs and sales-led organizations can have even 40 to 50 people, while the marketing team looks like it's either in phase 1 or phase 2. So I would say they kind of grow independent of each other unless there is a significant investors involved and they've decided to fund all the functions quite equally. That being said, as marketing moves through these phases, ideally more pipeline is being generated. And as more pipeline is generated, you need more people to service the leads that are coming in the door. And so you're going to need more SDRs, you're going to need more account executives, you're going to need more people to onboard additional accounts as well. And so usually we see sales teams grow, and likely you have, instead of just a VP of sales and reps underneath that person, you might have a head of account management, a head of SDRs, head of BDRs, et cetera, being added as well. And then as you have certain activities, like let's say ABM is a core strategy for what you're working on, that ends up producing a sales structure that mirrors this, right? So ABM as a strategy usually follows from a large or heavy segmentation exercise where you look at your total addressable market, you look at who are the top verticals, who are the targets, the top accounts, and then you need to have sprints against that where marketing is producing content and campaigns for those accounts, and then sales has reps focused on those accounts. And so you need to have a sales team that can be agile enough to have a structure like that, and usually that involves more people. So at scale, we've seen companies that look like this that have about 50 marketers, and on the sales side, they have 50 to 75 reps as well. I see other questions here. Should marketing director be leading UI UX for your mobile app projects and website projects, or should you have a separate role for those activities? I'd say separating out UI UX from marketing probably makes sense. We have seen creative teams under marketing as well, especially as paid social is becoming more important. So marketing owning creative is important, but UI UX, I would say, can live outside of that. It could live in product management or somewhere else. And when it comes to building the website, marketing may have a web dev and a designer. You want UI UX to live under marketing in those cases, but you don't want overall product UI UX to live under marketing. With the emergence of RevOps and marketing ops potentially getting subsumed within RevOps, does it hamper the role's effectiveness at all? Yeah, that's a good question. I'd say I use marketing ops here quite interchangeably. This could be RevOps instead. You could have a RevOps leader that has that this person is reporting into. So maybe this is a dotted line to the CMO, and their actual reporting structure is to a VP of Revenue Ops who also leads operations for sales or customer success as well. Main point being the function here is to figure out how effective is our marketing effort. So you want to be able to have a person dedicated to that. We see a lot of companies that we come into for engagements, and they don't have a dedicated person to pull the right data. And so they're kind of flying blind, and they don't know what's working, what's not working, and where to scale, where to allocate budget. So even if there's one person in this role as a start, that's good enough. But we need someone that on a dedicated basis can tell us what's working and what's not inside marketing. I see a question here. Can these approaches be applied to any vertical and industry? 100%. I mean, whether you're a tech-enabled service, B2B SaaS, another type of a platform, marketing teams go through similar evolutions. What you might find is the roles get adjusted a little bit depending on your specific market. So for example, let's say you're a two-sided marketplace, like an Uber. Well, you might, instead of having a director of outbound demand gen and director of inbound demand gen, you might have a marketing leader focused on driving demand for riders, and you might have a marketing team focused on driving demand for drivers, because you need both sides of that two-sided marketplace to grow. And so it's very similar, but you might just make those adjustments depending on your specifics. Another question, how much did you spend on marketing headcount compared to programs? This is a great question. I actually think a lot of companies get this wrong. In a lot of cases, we see that you have 2 to 3 marketing people and then they're given very limited budget. But in other cases, we see that headcount is like 50-50 with spend. So if let's say you have 3 people and collectively you're paying them 200,000 or something like that, and your marketing program spend is 200,000, you're at 50-50. But ideally, with 200,000 in headcount, you should probably be spending 400 to 600,000 at least on programs, because people can scale their spend with different channels, right? Especially paid media is not dependent on headcount to scale. And so ideally you want to be in like a 30 to 30-70 range, or 25-75, or even 20-80 range would be incredible if you can keep headcount at 1/5 of what you're spending. That means you're incredibly efficient. But if you're at that 30-70 range, that's quite a healthy place to be as well. How should you prioritize the order in which you hire for each role? This is another great question. So I would come back to this framework. Is you want to look at your available growth opportunities, right? Ideally, for example, let's say we need to hire for all of these functions. Well, if we were to map out all the growth opportunities available to us, we'd say, hey, we need to do cross-sell, upsell, so we need customer marketing specialists. At the same time, we need to go to 10 events a year. At the same time, we have a ton of inbound volume on paid search or paid social. We still need to do ABM to target our top accounts. Like, all of these ideas are good. And then your board says, by the way, you can only increase headcount by 3. And so when you come here and you look at all your available growth opportunities, you almost want to map that in a spreadsheet and look at the opportunity and the ROI from each opportunity, and then how much headcount is required to actually capture that opportunity. And as you go through that exercise, you're going to identify certain things that are more important than others. So, and certain things that are more core to your strategy. So if you're a company that's been built on inbound demand gen, it might make way more sense for you to get increased headcount on the inbound demand gen team, versus you think ABM is a key strategy, but you're just not there yet. You don't have the right people. You have never sent out an ABM email in your history. And so here is where more pilots are required. So instead of going and hiring like an ABM manager or a director of outbound demand gen, maybe you pilot that with your current content team, but you give most of the funding to your inbound demand gen team. And so I'd say as you identify those and you map those into like a prioritized list, it'll become clear as to where the funding should go. And then you map that against how much funding is available so that you can make some trade-offs. How can you convince the CEO/board that they should invest dollars into hiring for marketing rather than bringing on another salesperson? Another great question. In this case, this actually happens all the time. We are even asked this by CEOs who we work with, which is, should I give marketing $100,000 more, or should I hire a couple more sales reps? And I think the answer to this question is more about what does the company want to be and where are they in terms of their stage of their journey. So if a company is sales led, inevitably this question is always going to come up, and no matter what marketing is contributing, because sales, it's very easy to prove. You dial for a certain amount of dollars and you get certain deals in the pipeline. You can always add more pipeline by adding more people. But at some point, sales efficiency starts to hit a ceiling. And so looking at sales metrics and looking at sales efficiency and revenue per rep, or your conversion rates through the funnel, I'd say that's a key piece of data that needs to be brought to the table. Then looking at ways in which marketing is improving those conversion rates. So by doing a webinar or creating assets that the sales team can use, likely those conversion rates have improved. So you want to bring some of that data to the table. And then I'd say the third thing is really beyond bringing data and knowing that marketing can actually move the needle, is working in a company where there is a belief that marketing is a core revenue driver going forward, and having a CEO that buys into that vision, or a revenue leader that buys into that vision. Otherwise, it's always going to kind of feel like an uphill battle. And so the steps to go through is validate it with as much data as possible, build the right business cases, try to educate internally. That's a core job as a marketer, because that is one of the core ways to succeed, is to get enough internal buy-in. But after a certain point, if you're not getting enough buy-in, I would say it's quite possible that team is stuck in its old ways, and it might be not possible to convince people to spend more money on marketing. So having that buy-in almost happen intrinsically from the CEO, and CEOs who get it themselves, like they come to us and say, hey, I know marketing is a lever for us going forward, so that's where I'm here. And so similarly, you want them to come to you with budgeting increases with a similar approach. I'm just looking at more questions. No, I think that's about it. So what we'll do, guys, is we will take all the recordings and the slides and everything and share with you guys. And we'll put it all into a blog post as well. But that being said, thank you all for showing up and participating, and appreciate all the questions. And hopefully we'll be doing more of these in the future. Thanks a lot.